Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of American Soccer Quick Kicks. I'm your host, David Wright. I have with me today returning guest Jake Sillick from the U.S. from the @US Open Cup
Yep.
Twitter account.
Yeah.
Do I have that right?
Yep. Thecup.us is our
There you go.
official name.
So, if you've been following American soccer at all, you know there's been a lot of drama over the last few months concerning the U.S. Open Cup and the question of Major League Soccer's participation in it. For those, just let me reframe the conversation. We kind of covered, I went into detail of what this tournament is last year, but this is our equivalent of the FA Cup. This is the oldest tournament that we have as a soccer nation. It goes back well over 100 years at this point, and it is theoretically for every professional club. Help me, Jake. So every professional club in America,
It's open.
plus it is open, and it's
It's
not
in the
just
name. It
professional.
is open to everybody.
Yeah, you could. I mean, theoretically, any club could end up participating in this tournament because there are open divisions. There are opportunities for amateur clubs to qualify and participate in this. It is, I love it because of what you usually expect in open cups around the world, where these David and Goliath type matchups are possible. And the prize at the end is a spot in the CONCACAF Champions Cup. And so, at least symbolically, theoretically, any club in our country has a chance to participate at that level. And Major League Soccer threw a curveball last December and decided, they announced kind of unilaterally that they were just not going to do it this year. And that was news to U.S. Soccer Federation, and they had something to say about it. So, to help me sort it all out, because it's been a mess, there's been twists and turns, there's been a lot of secrecy, things are starting to come out now. And we have a format for this year, and it's not what everybody wanted necessarily. But, Jake, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on again. It was really fun last time. I'm looking forward to diving in this time. There's a lot to talk about.
Yeah, I
Um,
appreciate you coming on, and
yeah.
I just want to set you up and let you go here. Just kind of tell us the story of what happened. Like, why you want to pick it up in December? Or you can pick it up earlier than that. Just
Yeah. Well,
what's going on
a
with Major
little
League
bit
Soccer's
earlier.
thinking?
I would say there in September there was a change from what we understand. There was a changing. There's always been an MLS representative on what's called the U.S. Open Cup Committee. So this is a committee of the stakeholders. You get two amateur representatives, you get two athletes, which are required by law, and you get two professional representatives. One of them is MLS, one of them is USL. They run essentially operate the tournament. They decide everything from the prizes to how much the travel reimbursements are to how the format's going to be done, everything. This is what runs the tournament. This is when everybody thinks of US soccer, they might think this is a separate organization that has like power and stuff, and everything's run from the top down, maybe from JT Batson, you might be aware of, or Cindy Cohn or stuff like that. That's not what US soccer is. US soccer is a membership organization where all of the soccer members of this country come together and they dictate and they talk about and they guide the direction of the game in the country. So that goes from our national teams, that goes from our youth to our adult amateurs and everything that's a part of it. The Open Cup is a part of that. So what US soccer collectively decides is that the stakeholders of the Open Cup get to run it. That's why the committee is what it is right now. So they've always been in discussions of how can we improve this, how can we make it better, what where do these things make sense. So in August, September-ish, I believe, it switched from being and this is all part of MLS organization. This wasn't necessarily tied to the Open Cup, but they brought in Nelson Rodriguez, the former president or general manager of the Chicago Fire. Those fans may have some choice words about him. Basically, he was brought in as an executive vice president, kind of sharing the duties with Todd Durbin, and so Nelson Rodriguez is now kind of in charge of MLS on this committee, and a lot of the other things you might have been hearing him with the referee lockout and stuff like that. He's been
Okay.
he's been saying a few words
So
with
he's the
that.
MLS. He's the MLS representative on the U.S. Open Cup committee.
Correct.
Okay.
So he was presenting MLS's point of view of where they feel a lot of this is going. And there's some tug and pull with that with the rest of the committee. This isn't like a necessarily majority, rules type thing necessarily in some things. They all gotta kind of come to a consensus realistically, or you can't really have a competition. So if one stakeholder isn't happy, you're going to have issues. And so that's where that's kind of started off from. And then what that kind of led to in December at the MLS Board of Governors meeting. And let's make that also very clear. The Board of Governors is essentially the owners of the individual teams at MLS. Um, so everybody had a vote, and from what we understand, it was not a unanimous vote. In fact, Nelson just said this recently in an interview. It definitely was very contentious and very passionate on both sides. But whatever that threshold was to vote, they voted and they said we were going to remove our teams and replace them with MLS Next Pro teams.
Let me stop you right there because I want to set
Yeah,
this up a little bit more. MLS started play in 1996,
yeah,
and as I understand it, part of their requirement for being given Division One status
yeah.
was the obligation to participate in the Open Cup.
Correct. I don't have a whole lot into the background of that. From what I can tell, though, at some point probably in that time frame it was added to the US soccer bylaws that it was US soccer's responsibility to hold cup competitions, namely the Open Cup. And then they created a policy behind that called the Open Cup policy. So there's bylaws and a policy manual. This policy manual kind of dictates the overall general structure of that. So yes, when MLS was created, they basically said we're going to create, or not create, we're going to take over the Open Cup from who was running it at the time, which was the adult amateur organizations, and we're going to take back control, and it's going to be part of our bylaws and our policies to run this competition. And MLS agreed to that, and the other professional leagues that existed at the time, I believe it was called the APSL at the time, agreed to it, and the adult amateurs were all like, yes, absolutely, we're on board. We should have this become a thing. They agreed to that. They agreed to hold this. They agreed to be a part of it, and they agreed to do this.
And
Now,
I think that's been good. I mean, it's good for the spirit of the game.
well, absolutely. They all understand how important that is, and that's been reiterated from all stakeholders, including MLS this week. They may have different ideas, but I think everybody agrees that this competition is important.
And it also creates the dream, I would guess, for the lower
Yeah,
division and the open division clubs.
absolutely. It is an important part of the game, and I think MLS just may have some differing opinions on what that is.
Okay, so take us. I cut you there off to kind of set that up, but
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think you
sure.
got us up to just.
So they wanted to replace them with their MLS Next Pro teams. They've been very adamant that these players deserve an opportunity, and there's some merit in that. But at the same time, there's an issue when you have both a first team and a reserve team in the competition at the same time. Nelson says that it's done elsewhere in the world. We actually looked into this, and there may have been other competitions that did it in the past. There's been famous examples in Spain and the Netherlands of major clubs having to face their reserve teams like in finals or semifinals later or later in the competition and stuff like that. As far as we can tell, that's no longer the case. Well, I've looked at Spain, Italy, the Netherlands, England, like all these major Western European countries where the sport is so huge. None of them allow reserve teams anymore. None of them. And then even other first world countries, Japan, Australia, South Korea, into there, and all of those, none of them allow them. The largest country I could find that still allows a affiliated reserve professional team in their domestic cup was Poland, and we're talking into Eastern European countries now, and like great countries, but they're not Spain, they're not England, they're not Italy, they're not Germany.
Right.
These countries don't allow that because people come to realize, well, we can't have these teams play each other. That's you can't have an honest game, no matter if you have the absolute best intentions of those two teams playing each other. Fact is, they're owned by the same organizations. You go back dealings, and you could have essentially a rigged game. You can't allow that to even possibly take place. So that's why those teams have to be separated if they're both going to play. So you're like, okay, well, why don't we just do that? Well, if we did that, you could do that with a few pairs of teams, and it's not going to greatly affect the tournament in terms of who matches up against who. Remember, travel is a major concern of this tournament. If we start disallowing pairings, all of a sudden now that travel distance goes up because now you can't play a team that would be nearby in that regards. So what MLS was probably wanted first was to allow all 25 of those teams into the competition at the same time as the reserve teams. Now you have 25 different pairs of teams that you have to avoid playing each other.
Mm.
We're essentially just
Oh,
throwing trout regionalization out the window at that point.
so you're talking about a scenario where all the first division and the reserve teams are all
Correct.
playing.
I,
Okay.
I, I, from what I understand, that's what MLS probably wanted initially, and U.S. Soccer shut that down for obvious reasons. If
Well,
we have
sure.
to keep those teams separated, and if we start keeping those teams separated, we're going to start having travel distances go through the roof, and travel costs go through the roof as a result, and that's going to cost everybody way more money. And what MLS has also reiterated is that we want all of our travel, and we want everybody's travel. Nelson even said this week. We want everybody's travel to be fully covered. Nobody should be traveling at a loss, and there is also some merit in that, because I also hear that from amateur teams that are like, hey, $15,000 isn't really enough when there's a flight involved, or we have this amount of party traveling to that. We end up taking a loss on that. And so there's definitely some merit to that, but at the same point, it's like, well, we can figure out a way to increase that for everybody's benefit. You don't have to take yourselves out. At least that's also kind of the theory behind it. There's also plenty of other things with that, but I'm trying to focus mostly on the monetary aspects, because Nelson has also kind of um, stressed that the monetary aspect, I think, is the most important aspect, and
So
that kind of tracks with
okay.
what the owners would want.
So what we know is that in December, MLS announced that first teams would not be participating.
Right.
It would just be the MLS Next Pro teams. That seemed to take the federation by surprise. Did they not see it coming at all?
I would think if it's a little hard to say. I think it did to an extent, but they knew that they were having these discussions, and that there was some like rift. There was definitely some disagreements that had to be worked out. But from what we understood, it looked like things were progressing. Like it wasn't like, oh, like we can't solve this, it's going to be untenable. It was, oh, we're working towards it. It's looking good. And then all of a sudden, bam, the
Yeah.
MLS Board of Governors does this.
Okay. So for anybody who's watching that may not know everything that happened is that MLS announced their first teams would not be participating, and they had their season schedule like ready to announce. And as it turns out, because of that requirement where you kind of have to play in the Open Cup, what they actually had to do was request permission from the federation,
Correct.
and which they requested apparently after their announcement. And the federation came on a couple days later and said, "No, we've denied that request." And
That's
that's
correct.
what threw everything into chaos, and nobody knew where things stood for a long time
Well, from
from a public
from what we
perspective, anyway.
understood at the time, so Nelson also held a press conference that same day of that U.S. Soccer announcement of the denial, and he said, "Yeah, that's done. We're all going to be in, but we have to moving forward, work towards making things better." Then the next day, over in Europe, the European Court of Justice ruled in favor of the European Super League that UEFA used too much of its power to deny the European Super League. That got MLS's lawyers a little bit perked up, and they said, well, look at that. Not an exact analogous situation, but kind of showing that you can't really dictate to us what we can and cannot participate in.
Uh, so, because
Uh,
it's my understanding that while there seemed to be a standoff and they were in regular talks to figure out the extent of MLS's participation and what the format was going to look like, that the whole time the federation was sitting on the nuclear option of we could take
so
away your Division One
let's
status.
put that to bed. No, that was never on the table.
So they legally had that in their, like,
They
but it was
legally
never,
have that right, of course,
but it was
but
realistically nothing they would
that
ever
was
do.
never on the table because that doesn't benefit anybody, and and that's a quick way to a lawsuit, regardless of whether this could have led to a lawsuit or not. It's kind of up only for them to really know,
Uh-huh.
but taking away MLS D1 sanction, that's a very quick way to a lawsuit because that would be guaranteed.
So here's my thing. I know that a part of this whole scenario here is that MLS is citing fixture congestion, too many games on the
Mhm.
calendar. That is largely a problem they created themselves with the Leagues Cup coming in. And
It's not just that too. This was brought up in that same interview with Nelson from Sebastian Salazar of ESPN. He's like, "Hey, look at these teams that are scheduling friendlies. DC United scheduled a friendly with the Ethiopian national team, and
right,
then so United scheduled
right,
a team. These teams are scheduling more.
yeah, that's
I thought this was an issue. Why are
right.
we doing this?
Very
You know,
suspicious.
and Nelson had to kind of answer for that, and he kind of little bit of diversion, and he kind of said, "Well, it's not just about fixture congestion; it's also
Oh,
about player load over the course of the tournament."
and,
And it's like,
okay.
okay, I also get that, but that's not what the question was about.
Okay, so this is that leads into what I was going to get to, and that is you're talking about player load. I get it. Got to manage the minutes,
Yeah,
and I get the idea of you've got your reserve players playing in the third division.
yeah.
There's another third division league, and those guys get an opportunity to play in the Open Cup. Why should the MLS Next Pro players be penalized and denied that opportunity? And
But
you want them to have it. I mean, I
here's
get
the
all
thing:
that.
that you just described was essentially the simple solution. All MLS has to do is bring those kids up to play in those early round games, which had already been happening.
Like that's what I don't
Literally
get is
already been happening.
like all you have to do is change the roster rules to allow this
Yeah.
to happen more freely, and MLS can change the roster rules. They don't need anybody's permission.
They don't need
So
anybody's
why the
permission.
drama?
I don't know. I don't know. You have to ask them why they wouldn't take this option. It clearly took some bean counters numbers or whatever, and they decided this was the better option. Which, we can disagree on it, but that's what they decided on.
Well, I mean, I get it. That right now the rules are in place where a reserve player only gets a limited number of call ups before you have to give them a certain minimum contract and all that kind of stuff. But you can just change the rules. You can say for Open Cup, this is
They
how it
have to
can
go
be
back to the bargaining table because that's actually in the CBA itself
with the players. Okay,
with the
so
Players Association,
this
which
so the
means the Players
CBA.
Association. The reason the Players Association hasn't made any official comment, Bob Foose has made personal comments of what he feels about the Open Cup, but he stated immediately before that says the Players Association has no formal opinion on the Open Cup. We are not taking any
Uh,
stance. They stayed neutral because they knew that if MLS had to go that route, they would have to go to the bargaining table with them. And if they
okay,
have to go to the bargaining table with them, okay, cool. You want this? Well, we're going to want this other thing in return.
gotcha.
That's how collective bargaining works and unions work. So I totally understand the association management's position on that, where they want to try to get the best for their players on that, but at the same time, all the players that were interviewed, from people like Hector Herrera, from Jordan Morris, to a ton of different players. There was a New York Rebel player that I'm blanking on as well that said, "Hey man, we love the Open Cup. The Open Cup's amazing." Hector Herrera said it was the greatest trophy that he's ever won in his career for Houston. His wife said he was like, absolute things that he didn't have to say. Nobody forced these guys to say that the
Right.
Open Cup was amazing. They could have just said, "Well, we kind of like it. It's a great competition," or a little bit less. They went above and beyond to say how great the Open Cup was. So the players clearly enjoy it, but they also understand that there's negotiations regarding that.
Okay, so the next pro reserve, all those players are in the same players union. It's under the same CBA as
Not
the.
not 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 the MLS Next Pro players. That's the issue. Is that those are
Oh,
not union players.
okay,
So then you also
okay,
have that whole. It's a little bit complex, and so I understand. I understand that there's complexities to it, but there's that is the solution.
Right.
Really, that could have been easy. It's just if player loads a problem, just make the roster bigger.
Yeah, and don't they had to have been aware of the PR hit they were going to take
Well, of course.
by this. So I mean, so the Leagues Cup, the version we have now, it expanded and changed its format. And last year was like the first year of the real Leagues Cup,
Right.
month-long competition between every club in both MLS and Liga MX. And I have to say, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought all of those games were fantastic.
I did too. You know, I really am disappointed how this has become a Leagues Cup versus Open Cup situation because they are two different competitions and two vastly different things. You just named one of them. It's a month-long competition where nothing else is going on. MLS designed it that way so that teams could fully focus on that competition and nothing else. And so that's why you'll see better lineups in that than versus an Open Cup competition, which is on a weekday in between two league matches on weekends. Like there's going to be player rotation and stuff like that. I think there needs to be better education amongst the fan bases, and I think that's the job of the clubs themselves. And in
So
that,
so I get it. You know, the Open Cup has history, and
yeah,
so and if I had to choose for one to exist, I would choose the Open Cup just because of that history. The Leagues Cup, like you say, is something different, and I absolutely loved it. I thought it was a ton of fun. Of course, we understand that the Leagues Cup is a competition that is kind of within the control of MLS and Apple,
yeah,
and the Open Cup exists outside of that control.
yeah.
So I assume that's not a coincidence that this is the year that we're having this disruption.
Especially after having Lionel Messi in the Open Cup semifinals and then was going to be in the final until injuries took him away. Although they did sell it like he was going to be there, that's a whole other issue.
Yeah.
But U.S. Soccer made a pretty penny off those three games through TV rights and sponsorships, and MLS knows that, and they don't get to see it. They didn't get to see a dime of that.
Yeah, there's a lot of people putting out money for Messi that we're seeing him earn money for other people.
Yeah,
Right? Because he was playing in this Open Cup, a tournament that they don't have a piece of. So
they,
it's a shame that they would take that
they don't
attitude.
have a piece of, but they did have a piece of it.
Big,
See, because for the longest time, from 2004 to
right.
2021, Soccer United marketing was created at that point to kind of save MLS and also save the World Cup rights and a lot of that. And they bought U.S. Soccer's full catalog of commercial rights. That means it was Soccer United's marketing job to market the competition, to sell TV, to sell sponsors for the tournament, to sell TV broadcasters on the tournament, and all of that. That was Soccer United Marketing's job, which is an entity under MLS.
Right. So
That's
they
their
had
job.
they had an interest in the tournament
They
all that
they had
time.
an interest in it for making money. So while a lot of people don't get with the Open Cup, is that there's two kind of pots of money that come in from the Open Cup. So you have the operating budget, which is what is publicly available information. We've reported on it and things like that. Um, that's a designed, balanced budget. What the money that comes in from that gets sent right back out. And there's not designed to make a profit. It's not designed to make a loss. It's designed to be as balanced as possible. Now there's going to be little things that happen. You'll get a little profit some years and a little negative some years, but overall, for 20 years from about this stuff, on average, we're talking about a couple $100,000 a year, maybe in profit total.
Mhm. Mhm.
And but that money has to stay in the Open Cup. That's also in the bylaw or in the policy. So that operation budget is separate from what uh, the commercial budget is, and from the marketing and what brings in the TV revenue and the sponsors and all of that. That's a separate bucket. Those two don't mix. They haven't mixed. Why they don't? You'd have to ask the board at U.S. Soccer and the staff, but they don't mix. So MLS was losing money on the operation side. They were not getting a lot in travel reimbursements, as Nelson has said, and providing a lot in hosting fees. So they were losing money on that end. But then while Soccer United marketing was there, overall, they were making money on U.S. Soccer. I mean that's how a contract would work. Like that shouldn't have to be stated as obvious. If you're going into a representation agreement with a company and taking their rights and you're paying them back, if you're not taking a cut of that, you're not making a profit off of that.
Right.
So
Right.
they're making money off of U.S. soccer's stuff. That's how the contract it works at the end of the day.
And so that changed. That
and,
that
and, and then that
relationship.
changed. That relationship was severed. U.S. Soccer said we're going to bring everything in house. We're going to have our own commercial team. They hired a CCO, David Wright, late September 2020, about a year before the agreement was over, so you can ramp up that department. And then as soon as that agreement's over, okay, now we're going to start selling sponsorships. And lo and behold, this year we've got four sponsors. I can't remember all of them off the top of my head, but I remember at least Marriott Bonvoy and New York Life and Budweiser. I believe is another one, I feel like I'm missing one. But these are sponsors that are now sponsoring the Open Cup in some way. Um, but that money now stays fully within the U.S. soccer ecosystem, which generally, at the when you think about it, funds really our national teams, especially our men's national team and our women's national team, and they deserve all the money they can get to be as successful as they should be.
Okay, it sounds like maybe there are some understandable business limitations and all this that maybe both sides are now understanding a little bit better. But I think the first question I want to ask you here is, or I should say, the next question I want to ask you here is, so how much of this, this change, because the MLS has kind of lost a business interest in the running of the tournament with what you were describing with Soccer United marketing and everything, how much of this disruption is related strictly to that dynamic changing? What I'm getting at is, does Apple's involvement in what's going on with the regular season have anything to do with this?
I don't think it's necessarily Apple. I'm sure they would like most of the eyeballs being on them for their reasons, but they can't fully control MLS on what competitions that they participate in. They know they have to be in CONCACAF Champions Cup as well. And they know they'll be in the FIFA Club World Cup next year. When that happens, Seattle's already involved in that. There's probably going to be more teams, so they know that that's a thing. um, I wouldn't read too much into Apple necessarily being
Okay.
being a part of it. I would definitely just say it's more just the owners looking at it and saying, well, we're losing money on the operations bucket, and now we're not making any money on the commercial bucket. Something's got to change in that regard.
Well, let me ask you a question. I mentioned that nuclear option of taking away the D1 sanction, and you said that was not a realistic thing that they would ever do. Couldn't there, I mean, theoretically, there could be another nuclear option, which I understand by the nature of the fact that it's so nuclear, they would never do this. But it seems to me one legal option that the Federation would have would be to redefine how the CONCACAF berths are awarded.
So that's a misnomer, or that's I think people misunderstand how that competition works. It is CONCACAF's competition, and we actually got some rumors that were said, and then kind of sort of confirmed also by USL USL President Paul McDonough, who kind of said CONCACAF kind of dictates, not fully, but mostly what it is. And this actually is backed up. I also went in and read the CONCACAF Champions Cup regulations, and in various parts, it is clear that CONCACAF has the final say.
Ah,
They have the
okay.
final say in who's in the tournament. They have the final say in how qualifications done. They have the final say in things. Do they work with the individual soccer federations in countries on that? Yes, they do, of course. But it's their tournament, and they're the ones making the money, and they're the ones that get to dictate that. So if they go and they say to U.S. Soccer, hey, if MLS is not involved in the Open Cup completely anymore, then that spot's we're going to take that away and reallocate it somewhere. And we kind of sort of got confirmation on that, not fully 100%, but it was kind of like oh yeah, this is really how it works.
See, I was thinking bigger than that. I was thinking if the United States gets 5 or 6 berths or whatever, could the U.S. Federation just say, okay, it's all those berths are going to be determined
Yeah,
by Open Cup results.
they can't do that because CONCACAF has the final say, and they would
Okay.
never allow that.
All right. I mean, I would hope that they
Yeah,
wouldn't, but okay, I didn't know that.
yeah,
I didn't know
yeah.
that's where the power lied.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's definitely some misinformation out there. I think there was some misinformation that people were under the influence that CONCACAF just gave out the spots to the individual federations and they decided fully well how it goes. No, it's kind of just like they say, well, we want three from Leagues Cup and we want three from MLS and three from Liga MXs and whatever those numbers are. I don't know them all tipping. And they're like, well, we kind of like the Open Cup, especially because it's one of the few domestic cup competitions in our region. We like that as long as MLS is a part of it. Same the Canadian Championship. We like that. That's awesome. As long as MLS is a part of it.
Okay. All right. I got you. I know that we now have a format and we have some. Why don't you lay that out for us? Exactly what is this going to look like in 2025?
Yeah. So one of the things that kind of came out of this was the adult council said, okay, look, if we're not going to necessarily get our way with having everybody involved, we want one thing and one thing over everything is we want our amateur teams to not have to play each other immediately and pair our numbers down before they face any pro teams. We want to immediately face a pro team right off the bat. Which cool, you want to do that? That's fine. That go bananas. So that's what we got. So they said, okay, cool. That first round will be all amateurs versus professional teams. Would be all the Division 3 teams. So there were 32 open division teams that were announced in December, right before this whole thing happened. They said, cool, y'all are in, and we're going to have you face off against all the Division 3 teams. And so they had 12 USL League One teams and 9 NISA teams, and then there were 2 independent MLS Next Pro teams that were always going to be a part of it. Well, that doesn't add to 32, so now you got to add in some MLS Reserve teams. So figuring it out, they said, okay, we got 9 of those in, and they're going to have some qualification system, but that was kind of A, temporary, and B, didn't matter. Kind of to put it. So that's how the first round's going to go. Then in the second round, they'll all play off against each other. So there'll be 32 winners, and then those 32 teams will face each other off in the second round, and then you'll have 16 winners from that into a third round where there are 16 lower seeded USL championship teams or Division 2 league that will face them off in the third round. And then in the round of 32, we're going to have the 8 MLS teams that are still involved in the competition. Those are supposedly the defending champion Houston Dynamo, is the way they're wording this, and then plus the next 7 best supporter shield teams, excluding teams that are in the CONCACAF Champions Cup. Why that matters so much, I don't know. Why couldn't they just have the MLS Next Pro teams involved that are in the CONCACAF? I thought this was about fixture congestion. As we've discussed, it's really not about fixture congestion at the end of the day.
Okay.
So that's what we have, and there'll be 8 of those plus 8 seeded USL Championship teams, which I think is a very, very awesome thing to see. We're going to have MLS and USL Championship teams enter in the same round of the tournament.
Okay. So basically, unless you're the defending Open Cup champion,
Yeah.
then if you're in CONCACAF, you're exempt from the Open Cup. So own like
I want to reiterate, and this has been told from MLS's side and from US Soccer side. This is a 1-year deal. They're gonna form a committee to try to find a long-term future for this.
okay,
This is so whatever is happening this year
could be a
may not be
one-off.
applicable next year or
Okay.
even or future years
Okay.
from that.
So but this year, if you're in CONCACAF, you're not in this tournament except for
Yep.
Houston because they're the champion,
Yep.
and then you're taking the next 7 in the Supporter Shield finish standings.
Right.
So you're basically getting mid-table MLS clubs
Mostly.
that are entering the tournament at the same time as the top seeded USL clubs.
Yes.
So and they're seeing each other in that initial
We're not
round
sure
that they're
yet. We
participating.
haven't gotten that information as of this recording. We expect to
Okay.
hear that soon. There's still a little bit still to work out with the particulars of the tournament. I'm trying to get what's called the handbook from US Soccer. They haven't released it yet. So
Now,
there's still some things being worked out.
now I know that USL has since announced that all of their teams would be participating at the championship level.
Yeah.
I would think that USL would be excited about this. I mean, it seems like their odds of winning would increase.
There are the reasons that they were unhappy about it at the time was just as MLS money. they are probably going to have to give up a little bit more of their gate to the tournament operating budget.
Mm,
So again, it goes back to that pot there. So MLS wasn't happy that they were supplying most of the money to that pot and not nearly getting enough. Well, now they want more coming out. Well, so that money's got to come in from somewhere, and it's going to come in from probably
okay.
this stuff, which is why USL was unhappy with that. Now that they're having to pay a larger share, so that all goes into it. We don't know the particular details of it yet. Again, still waiting on the handbook. When we get them, we're going to do a whole big story on it. We're going to go deep dive into it. I hope to have that soon.
Okay.
Hopefully any day now.
Okay.
We'll get there.
Um, so there's 29 teams in MLS. Only 26 of them are in the United States.
Right.
7 of them are not going to be in this at all in any form because of CONCACAF.
Eight
Eight,
actually.
8 will be right
No,
because
eight not because DC United gets around this by they're not in that top 7 in the championship cup, but then they also don't have an MLS next pro team. And so the
right.
way they worded it was that this is done by qualification in the MLS next pro league. And it's like,
Uh,
well, if you don't have a team in there,
so United is
you don't have
just
to worry about
out.
DC
They're
United is
just
just out.
see that no one there can be
Right.
happy with that. It seems to
Nobody
me this is a solution that's going to allow a tournament to exist this year, but probably nobody's very happy anywhere.
I don't you know, hey, that's the definition of compromise, as they say, right? Nobody's
But
happy with
everybody's a
it.
little unhappy.
Everybody's a little unhappy.
Because I mean, the teams didn't even get to choose whether they sent their first team or not. They were told
Correct.
if they could send their first team.
Correct. So I mean, let's reiterate how this has worked. This was decided by the board of governors. This was decided by the ownership. The ownership teams decided to do this thing in December, and the MLS executives are just staff.
Right.
They just execute the will of that. They say go make this happen. They're going to go make it happen.
And then of course soccer Twitter just melts down
Right.
and everybody. So I get it.
And
This
so
is
and so as I've said, um, I said I'm sure there's absolutely tons and tons of team presidents and general managers and players and executives and marketing people and lots of club staff that absolutely want the Open Cup and they want to be a part of it and everything. But the buck stops at the owner, and we don't know which ones voted where.
all right.
But
So
at this point, they're all in line.
all right. So when does this start in terms of like the USL and MLS starting their
Yeah,
participation?
so it's going to start in the first round in 2 weeks, and then we're going to go roughly every 2 weeks after that until after the round of 16, I believe. Then it's going to be a break because then that's going to come up right into Copa
June.
America
Right.
and all the international competitions. We're going to have one towards the end of Copa America, the quarterfinals, and then we're going to do the same thing that we did last year. The semifinals will be roughly the week after Leagues Cup ends, and then the final will be late September, right before MLS playoffs.
I assume broadcast details are not set, but the
Not
semis and the
set,
final.
but we're they're looking good. So we've been told hopefully an announcement this week, and everything's gonna be good. There's definitely some promising signs that every game is going to be covered. I'm not going to promise that as of this recording, but the reason I say that is there are 32 games in the first round. That's a lot of games. And so for a TV production company, whichever one it may be, I don't know, but they only have so much capacity to handle games at one time. So normally teams get to pick what day and time they want to play, but because of TV production concerns and stuff like that, they have to kind of go and say, well, we need to spread these games out. We need some games on Tuesday, some games on Wednesday, some games on Thursday. We got a pretty even spread of about 8 to 9 games or something like that. And I think it's as low as like 7 on like Thursday, but all within reasonable margins of games between days. So that means that there's probably going to be coverage of all of these games in some regard. I'm not going to promise that, but we were told that that's the reason why they do that. And so they're doing it for this round. So that's a good sign that something's going to happen.
Now, where was the final broadcast last year? Do you remember?
So the final was broadcasted on CBS Sports Network.
Okay.
Um, from what I'm hearing, it should probably stay completely within the Warner Brothers Discovery product of networks. So that's
Okay.
your TNTs, your Turner stuff, and then also HBO and stuff like that. Max. One of the things that's different this year that wasn't last year is the Max app has a BR sports section now that was created, I believe, is roughly about the time when the NHL and NBA season started.
Okay.
That did not exist last year during last year's Open Cup. That's probably why you saw games on YouTube. Now, we might still see games on YouTube, but I would not be surprised if that BR sports section
Mm,
has Open Cup games.
that makes sense.
Not promising, but that's just what makes sense to me because they definitely want people subscribed to the Max app.
I got you. All right. Well, maybe this will be a one-off, and maybe everything will be a little bit more sane next year. Everybody can find a solution that'll make them happy. But I want to give a call to action to everybody on Twitter who's freaking out over all this and is venting about MLS. I think there's one thing we could all do. You could probably guess what I'm going to say, and that's support this tournament. I mean, if money was flowing in like crazy, a lot of this would run a lot more smoothly, and a lot of people would want to participate. So I would encourage everybody find at least one match to go to. If you've ever complained once about this online, make sure you go to a match.
You
Buy,
know,
buy a ticket and fill those seats.
I would say those people that have supported for years and have been there and have gone to your local clubs, you're awesome. You're valid. Your feelings matter here, and that MLS is deciding to make this move and try to take away some of this joy. That's on them. It's not up to you to figure out how to make money at this tournament. That's on them.
Right. I would also say this: don't punish MLS by refusing to go to their Open Cup matches for the ones that have MLS clubs involved. Go to those too. If those maxed out, if those filled out, and there was money coming in the gates, MLS's attitude toward this tournament would change to some degree, I would think. But obviously, I'm not saying just MLS. I mean, I've been to lower division Open Cup matchups, tons of fun, and it means so much to those clubs and those organizations. Let this outrage and let this offense of against the spirit of the game in this country motivate you to actually go to a game, because the reality is a lot of these stands are still empty and there's not a heavy cash flow happening. Just go. You'll have fun. Buy the ticket, buy the merch, support this tournament, support your local club, and send a message that the public does want this tournament to flourish. You,
And Nelson cited some fan survey or whatever that said it was like 8% or something recognized or something. Um, I, I don't put too much stock in the surveys, in the polls anymore. I think you feel the same way, David.
yeah,
Um, people put things down there that they don't actually believe, or they're just like, I guess, and go through. I don't think that's something that MLS should be basing its major decisions on. They should do a little more legwork, or if it isn't, introspect. Hey, why aren't we getting people out here? Well, are we charging too much? Why aren't we including these in season tickets?
there you go.
We got a major deal in Austin. They were promised Open Cup season ticket games, and now they're reserve teams in the competition. And now they're hosting at a small training facility that only holds, like, I've been told, like around 1,000 people, but there's going to be like 10,000 people that want to go to this game. So they have to hold a lottery for that. And there's some really upset people about that in Austin, and that's really great to see.
Yeah.
Some of these clubs are giving these games out for free. Just go. You're gonna have a great time.
Yeah, I think money could solve a lot here. Cash flow, just the revenue, the game day revenue. If you're upset by this, put your money where your mouth is. Support the tournament where you can. I mean, there's so many clubs participating. The chances are there's one somewhere close to you at some point in this tournament. So I would hope that this would all just motivate all of us to actually get out of our house and go support the tournament, because I've been to Open Cup matches the last couple of years, and I tell you what, I just the sense I get of being there, knowing the history of the tournament, it just feels important in a way that even a MLS regular season match doesn't.
How often do you get to go where it's winner go home, loser's done? You know that adds so much to a game, and you don't get
Absolutely.
that often in the regular season. We get it over the course of the season. It's great. We
Yeah.
shouldn't just have it in the playoffs or in a one off in the league. It should happen over regularly over the course of the season. That's what the Open Cup fills in.
And I'm encouraged by what I'm getting from you is that there's still a lot of sentiment within MLS that's positive toward the idea of the Open Cup. They just got to find a way to make the numbers work. I don't really buy the congestion argument.
It's about the money. It's
It's
always been
it's
about the
about the
money.
money, and like I said, if the venues were selling out and the money was pouring in, people would find a way to make all this work a little bit more smoothly.
The,
But
yeah,
I hope we get record attendance at every round
I
this
hope so
year,
too.
and because that more than anything will change how this is managed and handled and approached and looked at and everything else. All right, Jake. Well, thank you very much for coming on. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Of course, so much. Thank
Um,
you so much for having me, David.
I got to think that covering the Open Cup is never boring.
Never, especially now. And 32 games in the course of 3 days. That is the most we've ever had to do in a single week. It is going to be tough for everybody here at the cup.us. And thank you to all of our volunteer writers from across the country that help us. We could not do it without you all so much.
I really enjoy your account. I mean, I think y'all do the best reporting and seem to have the complete knowledge on everything about the tournament, from the history to the inner workings to all the legalities.
And you
And
know who
so,
else is pumping out great stories? U.S. Soccer. Go on U.S. Soccer's website. Go to usopencup.com or U.S. Soccer. There's an Open Cup little tab, and they got stories. They just published one just today about Asheville City. Read about these smaller clubs, because their stories deserve to be told. And there's some great stories out there that are going to be told throughout this entire year. And the staff there at U.S. Soccer doing a fantastic job of telling those stories.
all right, Jake. Well, again, thank you very much, and I hope everybody learned a lot from this. I know I did, and let's hope we have a great tournament this year. Let's hope everybody turns out for it, and I guess I'll just talk to you next time.
Sounds good.
All right, man. Thanks a lot.
See ya.